Seches Bava Kamma Daf Lamed Hey contains one Mishnah divided into daf in half. Up until the Mishnah, the Gemara is discussing a sugi in Maseches Shabbos, which is relevant to a Mishnah we saw here. The Gemara is going to try to bring a raya to this question from our Mishnah. The sugi is the isurim of mavir and chayvel, where you light a fire or you cause a wound. Those malachos of Shabbos, are you chayiv for those if they are pure mekalkal? If you're only destroying something, you're burning something just to destroy it, and you're making a wound just to hurt, are you chayiv for that? Generally, there's no chiyuv, meaning there's no chiyuv deraisa, there's no skila on a malacha that's just a kilkul. It has to be a tikkun, it has to be constructive in some way. If it's just destructive, there's no issur deraisa. And whereas it's sad that there's exeris akasav on these two, that there isn't an issur deraisa even though they're purely destructive, and the Gemara as a machlokes about it. So the Gemara wants to try to bring a raya from it from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah discussed a comparison between the damage done by a person and damage done by an ox. And one of the things it said, that if an ox causes a fire which burns a pile of grain on Shabbos, you have to pay for the damage of the ox. However, if a person causes that damage, you don't have to, because that person is mischayev benafshe. That person ends up being given the death penalty for Chol Shabbos, and the rule of Kali Midramine says you can't be forced to pay for the same action that's going to give you the death penalty. Now, the Gemara says, what is the case over here? Is this burning for a tikkun? Is a constructive purpose? You wanted to make ash for some reason, or is it just a destructive burning? So the Gemara says the two cases, the case of the man and the case of the ox, have to be the same. Otherwise, you can't compare them. All factors have to be the same, other than the fact that one's an ox and one's a man. And an ox doesn't do things with intent to be mitakin. An ox just destroys. So since the ox is not a tikkun, it's just a kilkul. The case of the man, it has to also be not a tikkun, just a kilkul. And yet we see that he's putter, and the reason that he's putter must be because he's getting skila. So obviously there is skila, there is a chiv deraisa on a situation where it's just a kilkul. That's the Gemara's raya, and the Gemara offers a few answers for this. The Gemara first says, no, you're right, the case of the ox and the case of the man have to be the same. But they're not both talking about a case where it's just a kilkul. They're both talking about a case where it's a tikkun. The man is talking where he's matagin, that's where he gets the chiv misa. And the ox is also doing a tikkun. So where it says, how can an ox be doing a tikkun? So the Gemara answers, if Avi says, it's talking about a very smart shar that had a wound on his back. He got bitten by another ox, and he wanted to apply ashes to the back. Why the Gemara say it's the back, I'm not sure. Either way, he needed ashes. But what the Gemara says is that he intended to set fire to this thing so that he could have ash, so that he could then roll in it and apply ashes to the wound on his back. So the Gemara says, how do we know that that's what he wanted to do? The Gemara answers, simply because he goes ahead and rolls in the ashes after the fire burns. So the Gemara asks, is such a thing possible? Is there in existence an ox that can plan out that far ahead? The Gemara answers, yes. The Gemara says it's a story that happened with Rav Papa himself. Rav Papa used to prepare beer for sale, and he had an ox that had a toothache, and the cure for toothaches is to drink beer. And the ox went and broke a barrel of beer and drank the beer, and he was healed. So you see that level of planning, it can exist by animals. Now, the Gemara asks, how could you say that the case of the man and case of the ox has to be exactly the same? This is predicated on that idea. So the Gemara says, how could you say that? It can't be. Because the Mishnah also talks about the busha, the payment for embarrassment. And the payment for embarrassment, it says that a person pays that and an ox does not pay that. Now, the only way in which a person pays for an embarrassment that he causes is if he's mechaven, he intentionally causes the embarrassment. So, you mean to tell me that the case of the ox does not have to pay is also where he intentionally causes an embarrassment? That I'm not going to accept, the Gemara says, that an ox can intentionally mean to embarrass someone. So my answer is no, it's not that he intentionally meant to embarrass him, but he intended to cause the hezek. That's all you need. You don't have to have an intent to embarrass. For a person also, if he has an intent to cause the hezek, he'll be chayiv for busha, even if he didn't intend the actual embarrassment. The Gemara quotes what we said before on the Daf Zayin, that if somebody is mechaven to cause damage, even if he's not mechaven to embarrass, he still has to pay for the busha in that situation. Now, that's Gemara's first answer. The Rava says a completely different answer. Rava says, no, we're not talking about where you are chayiv de'iraisa. We're talking about even if you're not chayiv de'iraisa. The man is pater from having to pay anyway, even in a case where he's no isur de'iraisa, he's pater anyway. And the proof is that our Mishnah is pashas discussing even if it was b'shogeg. Doesn't have to be where you set fire to the thing b'mezid. Even if you set fire b'shogeg, the ox will be chayiv and the man will be pater from having to pay. Why is that? The reason is because were he to do it b'mezid, he would be mischayev b'nafshay. So therefore, if he does it b'shogeg, he's pater as well. And he says that there's exeris akasav that it teaches this. Where do you see that? So the Torah talks about a makah behema, a person who strikes a blow to an animal, and a makah adam, a person who strikes a blow to a person. And it links the two. Now, the person who strikes the blow to the behema is chayev, whether it's b'shogeg or b'mezid, because adam mud la'olam. Linking that, a person who strikes a blow to a person and kills him is also no difference between a shogeg and a mezid, except the opposite. In hurting an animal, there's no difference between a shogeg and a mezid that you're chayiv. In hurting a person, there's no difference between a shogeg and a mezid that you're pater from having to pay because he gets the death penalty. Not you get the death penalty by the shogeg, but because you get the death penalty by the mezid, you don't have to pay whether it's shogeg or mezid. And that's exeris akasav. And therefore, in this case also, a person sets fire. Since if he would do it by mezid, he would be mischayev ben afshin and would have to pay. Therefore, even if he does it b'shogeg, he doesn't have to pay because of the chiyuv benafshe that exists when he does it b'mezid. The Gemara asks, the Mishnah here clearly says the reason he has to pay is the reason he doesn't have to pay is because he's mischayev benafshe. You're telling me he's not mischayev benafshe. The Gemara answers what it means to say is that were it to be a mezid, if he was mischayev benafshe, therefore even if it's a shogeg, he's still pater from having to pay. That concludes this Gemara. We now begin the next Mishnah, which discusses a number of cases where there's a lack of clarity as to what happened, whether an ox caused a hezek or not, and whether or not which ox caused the hezek. In most of these cases, the Mishnah will rule if you want to collect, you have to prove what happened. If you can't prove it, we will have to go with the cheapest assumption. You can't collect anything that you don't certainly owe. So the most first case is where you have one ox running after another ox to hurt it. And then we find them afterwards, we don't know what happened, and we find that the ox that was being chased really is wounded. But the mazik, the owner of the mazik ox, the owner of the chasing ox, the pursuing ox, says it wasn't my ox that did it, although he was chasing him, your ox actually got hurt on a rock. And therefore it's not my achai. So the halach is the nizik, the potential nizik has to prove that his ox was really hurt by the potential mazik. Now, if there were two oxen chasing a third ox, and here we're not going to consider the possibility that there was a rock involved, but each of the two oxen of the chasers says it wasn't me, it was the other guy's ox. So the nizik can't collect from either of them because each one will say, how do you know that it was my ox that caused the damage? Maybe it was the other guy's ox. And again, they'll be right, and therefore you can't prove from either of them, you won't collect anything. Now, if those two oxen both belong to the same person, then he could collect because this person certainly owes. The phrasing of the Mishnah is both oxen are chayev, and we'll explain what that means. Now if you have the two oxen were owned by one person, so the person is most definitely chayev, but the question is which ox was it? And it makes a difference because one of them is big and one of them is small, and the bigger one has enough value to cover the hezek. The small one doesn't have enough value to cover the hezek. And remember, the hezek that you can collect is limited to the value of the mazik. So he's going to pay less if it was a small ox that did it. So the nizik says it was a big ox and I get my full value. And the mazik says no, it was a small ox. And again, we don't know what happened, so it's a mitzvah mechavayel v'raya. You have to assume it's a small ox. Now, if you had two oxen that were the mazik and two oxen that were the nizik, both had a big one and both had a small one, so here the mazik wants to claim the small ox was mazik your big ox. The small mazik was mazik the big nizik. That way, the large collection, the greater loss of the big nizik is limited to the small collection from the small ox. Certainly, the small nizik will collect his full amount from the large one, but that at least will limit the large collection to the value of the small ox. But that's how he wants to say it. The nizik wants to say no. The big ox damaged the big ox, and therefore he can collect full. And the small ox damaged the small ox, and therefore I can collect full. So again, the halacha of the Mishnah says is you can't collect more than you can prove. Now, in these last two cases, the same will be true if the two oxen of the mazik were not a gadol and a kata, not a big one and a small one, but a tam and a muad. And again, the mazik wants to say the tam is the one that attacked your ox, and therefore it's limited to the payment. Or if there were two nezikin, the tam is the one that attacked your large ox, and therefore you're limited again to migufa and to half the payment. While the nizik wants to say no, it was your muad, and therefore you pay me more. Again, it's a mitzvah mechaver al varaya. Now begin the Gemara. The Gemara discusses that there's an opinion of sumchis. Sumchis holds whenever you have an argument between two people whether money is owed or not, you split it. Instead of saying it says divide it evenly in half, even though there couldn't possibly be the correct psak, either he owes all of it or none of it, split it anyway. So the Gemara says in this Mishnah we don't say split it. Because of Chibar Abba, so you see that there are those who argue on Sumchis, and this Mishnah must be those who argue. That's why it's not saying split it, not saying split the dollar amount that they are each claiming from each other. So the Gemara says, hold on a second, we have to specify what our case is exactly and see whether Sumchis even said his opinion in this case or not. And we have to discuss who the people who are saying their opinion here, are they sure about it or are they claiming maybe? If they're claiming maybe, it's called a Shema. If they're claiming for sure, that's what we call a bari. Bari, it could be that they're both sure, which will be a bari ubari. Both not sure would be a shema, or one could be a bari, the other could be a shema, or vice versa. So the Gemara says, our case here, is it a bari ubari? Sumchis, we don't know if he said his halacha of splitting it even in the case of the bari bari. It's not so logical that it should be split in the case of the bari bari because both of them are sure and they are each saying the opposite things fully amount. Why should we split it? It would make more sense if it's a shema v'shema. We don't know who says what. We don't know. Nobody knows anything about it. Each one is not sure. So the Gemara says, "Ababar Mambal said to Rav Chia, would Sumcha say his halacha even in case of a bari ubari?" So he said, yes, Sumcha says this halacha even in case of the bari bari. So now the Gemara says, okay, so you seem to be assuming that our Mishnah is a bari bari. That's what you're asking. Would Sumcha have argued and said chalken even in the case of this Mishnah? What gives you the idea that this Mishnah is a bari bari? So the Gemara answers because if you look at the wording in the Mishnah, it says each one says in a very certain expression. The first one says, the Nizik says, your shor damaged my axe, a shorcha hizik. And the second one says, loy ki, no, the rock damaged your ox. So you see that they're saying in a very definite expression. So Papa asks, hold on a second. If the first case, which you're discussing about, the argument was that the ox that damaged or the rock that damaged, that's a bari bari, then the end of the Mishnah also has to be a bari bari, because the Mishnah has to be talking about the same case, other than the details that it changes. Now look at the Sefer carefully. It doesn't make sense to say it's a bari ubari. Why? Because in the case where you have the two oxen that could be the damager of the one ox, it could be the big one or the small one, it could be the tam, it could be the muad. They're arguing which one. The Nizik says it was the big one or the muad. The Mazik says it was the small one or the tam. That means that the one that the Nizik is claiming damaged his ox, the other one is arguing. He's denying it altogether. He's admitting to something that the Nizik never claimed. So the claimer is claiming something. The other one is responding that's totally false. Something else is true. In a case like that, is that called that he admitted to anything, or is it not called that he admitted to anything? So Rabbi Bar Nassan had said there's a case if somebody claims you owe me wheat, and he says, I don't owe you wheat, but I do agree that I owe you barley. So the halacha there is that you potter. You don't have to pay anything. So in our case, we should prove that that's not true. Because our Mishnah paskins that you at least have to pay from the small animal and from the tam. You at least have to accept the time of the mazik and pay that amount. That's not what Rabbi Avo said. That's not what Rabbi Bar Nassan said. Rabbi Bar Nassan said he's potter because what he's claiming the other person did not. What he admits he owes the nizik and the claimer is denying that. He's saying, no, you never did. You don't owe me that. You owe me something else. He's saying, I agree, I owe you the barley. He's saying, you don't owe me barley. So then he doesn't have to pay him. Even the barley doesn't have to pay. If he can't prove that he owes him wheat, and he doesn't agree that he owes him the barley, so then he doesn't have to pay him anything. So in our case, why should the nizik get the value of the small ox and the tam ox, that the mazik is saying was the damager, the nizik is saying it didn't happen. He's saying, Bari, I'm sure that that's not the axe that attacked. So why should he be able to collect that at all? So the case must therefore be a Bari v'shema. So the Gemara says, okay, who's a Bari, who's a Shema? If the nizik is a Bari, it doesn't make it any better, because the mazik is not sure which ox attacked. Okay, and the nizik says, I'm sure that it was the big one. Yet we say you make him pay the small one. Still doesn't fit with Rabba Bar Nasin, because he's collecting something that he doesn't say, that he says never happened. So it's the only way that it makes sense is if the mazik is the Bari and the nizik is the Shema. Therefore the nizik says, I'm claiming for both oxen because I don't know which one it is. It was one of the two. Whichever one it is, you need to pay me. The mazik says, I'm sure it's the smaller ox. Okay, so he'll pay from the smaller ox. So if that's the case, then Sumchas wouldn't argue though. Because it was a case of where the mazik is the Bari and the nizik is the Shema, why would Sumchas say that you split it? Hare, the nizik doesn't know. So the Gemara says, you're right. No, the Reisha is talking about where the mazik is the Shema and the nizik is the Bari. And that's the case where Sumchas says split, because the mazik says, for sure you owe me more. And it makes sense there to say split it. However, the case of the Seifa is the opposite. The mazik is the Bari and the nizik is the Shema. Is it possible, says the Gemara, for the beginning case, the Reisha and the Seifa, to be talking about different cases? If that's true, why don't you just say one's a Bari, one's a Shema, Shema? The Gemara says, no. To have a Reisha and a Seifa, one is a Bari V'Shema, and the other is a Bari, or one is a Bari, and the other is a Shema, Shema, that doesn't make sense. We're saying like this, they're both Bari V'Shema, and therefore it makes sense. In one case, the mazik is the Bari, and the nizik is the Shema. In one case, the nizik is the Bari, and the mazik is the Shema. Okay, that makes sense within the same Mishnah. But to have it all be switching, that wouldn't make sense. The Gemara now revisits the sugya of Rabba Bar Nasan, and the Gemara wants to see if our Mishnah is a proof against him or not. So again, Rabba Bar Nasan said, if somebody claims you owe me chitin, you owe me wheat, and the other one admits that he owes him the barley, says he denies that he owes him wheat and says I owe him the barley. So Rabbi Bar Nasan says his pater doesn't have to pay him anything, because what he's claiming he doesn't agree to, and what he's agreeing to the other one doesn't claim. So Gemara says, what's a chiddush? We learned this before in a brisa that if somebody claims chitim and he admits to sa'irim, he doesn't have to pay. The Gemara says there you would have thought just by reading that it means he doesn't have to pay the value of the chitim, but he does at least have to pay the value of the sa'irim that he agrees to. Kamashmal and Rabbi Bar Nasan doesn't have to pay anything. So Gemara says, how does it fit with our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says, if there were two mazikin, two cows that were the potential mazik, one was the big, one was small, or like I said, one was the muad, and the nizik says it was the big one or the muad, the mazik says no, it was the tam of the small one. The halach is hametzim echarei al varaya. That implies that if he doesn't bring a raya, he only collects like the small one. Why should he even collect the small one? According to Rabbi Bar Nasan, he should get nothing, as we said earlier. So the Gemara says, no, that's not the dig you should make. You should make that if he doesn't bring a raya, he doesn't get anything. He really should get, but since he can't prove which one it is, he doesn't take anything at all. Now, the Gemara says, well, we learned in the brisa that you collect from the big one the amount of the small one, and from the small one the amount of the big one, meaning you just take the value from whichever one it is. So the Gemara says that's somewhere where he grabbed it. Once he grabbed it, now he's the muksuk, and therefore he has a right to grab what he claims. The Gemara now brings the same raya, goes to the same thing in the case where you had the two oxen chasing two oxen. They're arguing which one attacked which. The Gemara again says the diak is the metzmei al varaya, implies that if he can't bring a raya, he at least collects from the small one. The Gemara says no, it means that he doesn't collect from any, because he doesn't bring a raya. And the Gemara asks, we have a brisa that says he collect the small amount from the big one and the big amount from the small one. And the Gemara again says it's where he grabbed it, so he made himself the muksuk.